30 tons of wet concrete don't just rumble, they scream. At 6:30 a.m., the ground beneath my boots didn't just shake, it groaned with a metallic, bone-deep snap. I watched from the bank of Willow Creek as a massive cement mixer, twice the legal weight limit, barreled across my grandfather's hand-laid 1923 stone bridge. The sound of a century of history shattering is surprisingly quiet at first, a series of sharp pops, like gunfire underwater, followed by a roar that swallowed the morning birdsong. The center arch, crafted stone by my grandfather's hands, gave way. The truck didn't just fall, it was consumed by the creek, sending a tidal wave of gray sludge into the pristine water. HOA President Marjorie Whitman stood on the far bank in a crisp white blazer, her blonde bob perfectly coiffed. She didn't gasp, she didn't call 911, she laughed, a sharp, jagged sound that cut through the dust. "Oops," she sneered, brushing a speck of dust off her sleeve. "I guess those old rocks weren't built for real progress, honey. Maybe now you'll finally sell that eyesore of a workshop and let us build something useful." She thought it was a tragic accident caused by my obsolete property. She thought she'd finally broken my spirit by breaking my bridge. What she didn't know, I'm a retired civil engineer. I don't just build things, I calculate points of failure. For 3 months, I'd watched her nephew, Derek, drive these illegal loads across my private property. I documented every vibration, every crack, and every violation. I knew exactly which truck would be the last. I hadn't just watched my legacy get destroyed. I had turned Marjorie's own arrogance into the perfect legal gallows. She thought she had just cut off my access to the world. What she was about to find out was that this bridge was the only legal utility and vehicle corridor for her entire 47-home gated community. By destroying my bridge, she hadn't just trapped me, she had just bankrupted herself and every neighbor who followed her. Want to see how a $45,000 truck turned into a multi-million-dollar nightmare for the world's worst HOA? Stick around, because the rustic engineer was about to show Marjorie exactly what happens when you ignore the weight limit of justice. My name is Roman Kellerman. I spent 30 years designing skyscrapers that defy the wind, but I retired to 12 acres of Pennsylvania heaven to work with my hands. My grandfather built our Fieldstone Bridge in 1923 using nothing but a slide rule and sheer grit. It was rated for 15 tons, perfect for farm equipment and cars, but a death sentence for modern industrial machinery. The trouble started when Marjorie Whitman moved into the neighboring Millbrook Heights. She didn't see a neighborhood, she saw a profit margin. Within 6 months, she was HOA president, and her first order of business was beautifying the area, which apparently meant getting rid of me. "Roman," she'd said, leaning over my gate with a smile that never reached her eyes, "your workshop is quaint, but it doesn't fit the executive aesthetic we're cultivating. My nephew Derek has a construction firm. He could tear this down and have a luxury condo up in a month. Think of the commission." When I told her my grandfather's barn wasn't for sale at any price, the war began. Marjorie's nephew, Derek, a man who looked like he ate gravel for breakfast and had the ethics of a vulture, was building the new HOA clubhouse. He realized that using my private bridge saved his cement trucks 20 minutes per trip. The first time a 35-ton mixer hit those stones, my workshop rattled so hard a 100-year-old chisel fell off the wall. I ran out, coffee in hand, to see the dust settling. "This is a private bridge with a 15-ton limit," I shouted at Derek. He didn't even look down from his cab. "Marjorie said it's a community easement now. Get used to the noise, old man." I called Marjorie. I was professional. I was calm. I explained the physics of stone arches, how they distribute weight, and how repetitive overloading causes fatigue cycles that lead to catastrophic failure. She laughed. "Roman, stop being so dramatic. It's a pile of rocks. If it breaks, we'll just pave over it. Consider it a contribution to the clubhouse." That was the moment I stopped being a neighbor and started being an engineer. I knew I couldn't stop them physically without getting arrested myself, so I began the documentation phase. I installed 4 high-definition 4K cameras hidden in the birdhouses along the creek. I borrowed portable weigh scales from an old colleague. Every time a truck crossed, I logged the weight, the timestamp, and the weather. Derek was running loads at 250% of the bridge's capacity. In my workshop, the damage was heartbreaking. A cherrywood bookcase I'd been carving for months literally shook itself apart during a midnight truck run. The vibration was constant. The smell of diesel exhaust began to seep into the wood grain. I spent my nights in the county archives, breathing in the dust of 1920s property deeds. I found the nuclear option buried in a 1923 utility filing. My grandfather hadn't just built a bridge, he had built a utility lifeline. The stone foundation contained hollow conduits that carried the main electrical, water, and fiber optic lines for the entire valley. When Millbrook Heights was built in the 80s, the developers had leased space in those conduits. The lease was ironclad. The bridge owner, me, was responsible for maintenance, but any damage caused by the lessee, the HOA, would trigger an immediate emergency restoration clause at the lessee's sole expense. I sent a formal cease and desist. I included photos of the hairline fractures spreading like spiderwebs across the mortar. I included the 15-ton limit signs. Derek used the letter to level a wobbly table in his trailer. Marjorie posted on the neighborhood Facebook group about obstructionist neighbors who hated progress. She even tried to have the county declare my bridge a public nuisance so she could seize it via eminent domain. She thought she was playing a game of checkers. She had no idea I had already calculated the exact date the bridge would fail. According to my stress test models, we were 10 days away from a total collapse. I stopped parking my own car on the other side. I moved my most valuable tools to the workshop loft. Marjorie's arrogance was a runaway train, and I was just the one who had greased the tracks. The week before the accident, the pressure reached a fever pitch. Marjorie had successfully turned the neighborhood against me. Neighbors I'd known for a decade stopped waving. I found "Move Out" posters pinned to my grandfather's oak trees. Marjorie called an emergency HOA meeting. She stood at the podium and painted me as a dangerous hoarder of land who was endangering the community by neglecting the bridge. "We need that bridge for emergency access." She cried to a room of 40 people. "If Mr. Kellerman won't maintain it, we'll take it." I stood up, my voice steady. "The bridge is perfectly maintained for its rated load. It is being systematically destroyed by Pinnacle Construction. If one more heavy truck crosses, it will fail." The room erupted in boos. Derek stood up in the back, smirking. "I've been driving over it all month. It hasn't budged. You're just a liar, Roman." That night I sat in my workshop, the smell of walnut shavings and diesel thick in the air. I looked at my grandfather's slide rule. He had built things to last, but he also taught me that you can't save people from their own stupidity. At 2:00 a.m., the ground began to thrum, a ghost run. Derek was bringing in 3 extra mixers under the cover of darkness to speed up the clubhouse pour. I sat at my monitors, watching the infrared feed. The first truck crossed. The bridge sagged 2 inches. I could hear the mortar grinding like teeth. The second truck crossed. A stone fell from the underside and splashed into the creek. I felt a wave of genuine grief. This was my history. This was my grandfather's sweat and blood. But as I watched Marjorie's BMW follow the trucks, her face illuminated by the dashboard light, I realized she wouldn't stop until I was gone. She didn't just want the bridge. She wanted the 12 acres for her Phase 2 luxury expansion. By Thursday morning, the bridge was a dead man walking. The center stone was cracked through. I called the county one last time to report the trespassing. They told me it was a civil matter. Then came Friday morning, 6:30 a.m. I saw the truck coming. It was a 40-ton monster, loaded to the brim. Marjorie was standing there, ready to supervise the final pour of her precious clubhouse. She waved the truck forward like she was leading a parade. I took my camera and walked to the bank. "Marjorie, stop the truck. The arch is failing," I yelled. She looked at me, adjusted her blazer, and laughed. "Bring it on through, Derek. He's just bluffing." The truck hit the center span. The stones didn't just break, they exploded. The sound was like a mountain splitting in half. The mixer's rear wheels dropped into the void first, followed by the entire drum. The cab was jerked backward, the driver jumping out just as the front tires left the pavement. The truck hit the water with a sound that felt like an earthquake, but the real disaster was just beginning. As the bridge collapsed, it tore the utility conduits out of the stone. Sparking blue light illuminated the dust cloud as the main power lines for Millbrook Heights snapped. A massive geyser of water erupted from the creek bed as the 8-inch main water line was sheared in half. The laughter on Marjorie's face died instantly. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of the geyser and the distant screaming of 47 home security alarms losing power. "My truck!" Derek screamed, running to the edge of the chasm. "My blazer!" Marjorie shrieked, as the muddy geyser drenched her in creek water and sewage. I looked at my watch, 6:34 a.m. right on schedule. I pulled my phone out and hit send on a pre-drafted email to the County Environmental Protection Agency, the DOT, and the Federal Bureau of Transportation. Marjorie looked at me, her hair matted to her face, her executive aesthetic ruined. You did this, you sabotaged it." "Sabotaged it?" I held up my tablet, showing the live feed of the 15-ton weight limit sign she had just walked past. "I'm a civil engineer, Marjorie. I told you exactly what would happen. You just didn't like the math." The next 4 hours were a masterclass in bureaucratic chaos. Because the bridge was the only legal vehicle access to the gated community, the 47 homes were now effectively an island. No power, no water, no internet. And because Derek's truck was currently leaking 200 gallons of diesel and 10 tons of wet concrete into a protected trout stream, the EPA arrived within 90 minutes. Marjorie was still screaming at me from the other side of the gap. "Build a temporary bridge. Right now, we have residents who need to get to work." "I'd love to," I shouted back over the roar of the water geyser. "But this is a crime scene now. And since your nephew's truck is the one that destroyed a historical landmark and caused a federal environmental violation, I don't think I'll be lifting a finger." Then the system turned its heavy gears. The county building inspector arrived. He looked at the wreckage, then at my 4K footage. He saw the timestamps. He saw the weight scales. He saw Marjorie waving the truck onto the bridge after being warned. "Mr. Kellerman," the inspector said, looking at me with newfound respect, "you warned them in writing. 3 times, certified mail, it's all in the folder." The shift was instantaneous. The concerned citizen Marjorie was now a criminally negligent actor. Because the utilities ran through my private property under a lease that the HOA had just violated, I invoked the restoration clause. Under Pennsylvania law, if a lessee destroys the infrastructure they occupy, they are liable for total system replacement, not just a patch job. I didn't just want a new bridge. I wanted a 1923 accurate, historically preserved restoration, which requires specialized stonemasons and federal permits. Total estimated cost, $1.2 million. But wait, it got better. The EPA fined Derek's company $50,000 per day for the concrete spill. The DOT discovered that Derek's trucks weren't just overweight, they were uninsured for commercial use on private roads. The false defeat I'd felt a week ago was gone. I was the only person with the blueprints. I was the only person with the land access. And I refused to grant an emergency construction easement to anyone associated with Marjorie Whitman. The neighbors, the ones who had posted those "move out" signs, were now begging me to let the water trucks through. "I'd love to help," I told them as they gathered at the edge of the creek. But Marjorie told the board that this bridge was a public nuisance. Since the HOA is currently suing me for interference with commercial operations, my lawyer has advised me to keep the property closed to all HOA members until the litigation is resolved. Marjorie was trapped in her own gated community. She couldn't drive her BMW out. She was using a bucket to get water from her swimming pool to flush her toilets. Her Phase 2 investors, they vanished the moment the Federal Bureau of Transportation opened an investigation into her customary access fraud. She had sold them shares in a development that had no legal road access. That's called securities fraud. By the end of the month, the HOA board held an emergency meeting on the bank of the creek, shouting across the water to me. They didn't boo this time. They fired Marjorie as president and Derek as the contractor on the spot. They begged for a settlement. I sat on my porch, hand-planning a piece of walnut, the smell of wood shavings finally drowning out the diesel. "I'll consider it," I said, "but the price of the bridge just went up, and I want Marjorie's Whitman Realty sign off my county road forever." The final resolution wasn't just a check, it was a total surrender. To avoid a class action lawsuit from the 47 homeowners who were living like pioneers in $800,000 houses, Marjorie was forced to liquidate her entire real estate portfolio to pay for the bridge restoration and the utility rerouting. Derek's construction company went bankrupt under the weight of the EPA fines and the forfeiture of his equipment. The cement mixer is still at the bottom of the creek, now a permanent, rusted monument to his stupidity, encased in the very concrete he was trying to pour. The new bridge is a masterpiece. It took 2 years to finish, but it's an exact replica of my grandfather's 1923 design, reinforced with modern steel beams hidden inside the stone. It's rated for 60 tons now, not that I'll ever let a commercial truck touch it again. I received a settlement of $450,000 for emotional distress and business interruption, which I used to turn my grandfather's workshop into a world-class furniture academy. I teach young engineers how to build things that last and how to protect them from people who only care about the next 3 months. As for Marjorie, she lost her BMW, her executive home, and her license to practice real estate in the state of Pennsylvania. Last I heard, she was living in a beige apartment complex 3 towns over. I hear the HOA there is very strict about the color of the curtains. I'm sure she's miserable. My neighbors, they're the best neighbors I've ever had. They wave now, they bring me cookies. They even helped me replant the oak trees Derek's trucks had gouged. They realized that having a militarized engineer next door isn't a threat to property values. It's the best security system money can't buy. I still stand on the bridge every morning at 6:00 a.m. with my coffee. The water gurgles under the stones, and the red-winged blackbirds are back in the cattails. The air smells like sawdust and victory. My grandfather's legacy isn't just the stone, it's the lesson he left behind. Never underestimate a man who knows how to measure. Have you ever had a neighbor try to destroy your property to improve the neighborhood, only to have it blow up in their face? Tell me your best revenge is a dish best served cold story in the comments. I'm reading every single one.